The tears were the worst part. They were hot, traitorous things that blurred the already gray world into a smear of cobblestones and shifting cloaks. Ember swiped at them with the back of a raw, chapped hand, a gesture as futile as trying to dam a river with a pebble. It only made her vision worse. The rough wicker of the bread basket handle dug into the crook of her arm. It was empty. It had been empty for 2 hours, and the sun was already beginning its slow descent behind the jagged peaks that clawed at the sky, turning the clouds the color of a fresh bruise. An empty basket meant an empty stomach, not just for her, but for Old Man Hemlock, whose rheumy eyes and rattling cough were a constant, painful reminder of her own precarious charity. A shove from behind sent her stumbling. "Watch it, Scrap!" A merchant grunted, his face a mask of annoyance as he hauled a sack of potatoes past her. Scrap. That's what she was. A piece of something broken, discarded in the gutters of the capital city, so far from the dark forests of her birth. She was Ember of the Blackwood Pack, a name that was a curse, a secret she guarded more fiercely than the few copper coins she sometimes earned. Here, she was just a girl with nothing, and that was safer. The tears came again, hot and thick with self-pity. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, sharp as shattered ice. "You are a disappointment, weak. Nothing." The words were 2 decades old, but they still had the power to flay her open. She ducked into the mouth of a narrow alley, pressing her back against the cold, damp stone. She just needed a moment. A moment for the burning in her throat to subside, for the world to stop tilting. She slid down the wall, her worn dress snagging on the rough bricks, and pulled her knees to her chest, hiding her face. The empty basket rolled onto its side beside her. A low sound cut through her misery. A whine. Ember's head snapped up. In the alley's entrance, silhouetted against the market's fading light, stood a wolf. It was enormous, a creature of shadow and muscle, its fur the color of a starless midnight. Its eyes, however, were what held her captive. They were the color of molten silver, intelligent and ancient and fixed entirely on her. Fear was a cold spike through her heart. Wolves in the city meant one thing: the king's guard. Or worse, the king himself. King Carden, the frost wolf, the alpha of alphas, whose name was a blade that kept the northern territories in a state of terrified obedience. She scrambled back, pressing herself harder against the wall, making herself small. A plea died on her lips. She was Blackwood. If he knew, if he scented it on her, it was a death sentence. Her pack had been his sworn enemy for generations, a bitter feud that had ended in their ruin and her exile. The wolf took a slow, deliberate step forward. It didn't growl. It didn't snarl or show its teeth. It simply watched her, its silver eyes seeming to see right through her skin, past the bone, and into the trembling, worthless thing she called a soul. Then it did something that shattered her reality. It lowered its massive head, nudged her fallen breadbasket with its nose, and then, impossibly, gripped the wicker handle gently between its teeth. With the basket dangling from its mouth, the wolf turned and padded back into the market square. Ember stared, her mind a blank slate of shock. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The most feared creature in the kingdom, the personal beast of the Alpha King, had just taken her empty basket. A moment passed, then another. She heard a commotion from the square, a woman's gasp, a man's curse. She forced her numb legs to obey, crawling to the edge of the alley and peering out. The great black wolf was walking through the market. People scrambled out of its way, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. But the wolf paid them no mind. It stopped at the stall of the baker, a portly man named Gregor who had refused her even the day-old scraps earlier. The wolf set her basket down at Gregor's feet and looked up at him, its silver eyes unblinking. It didn't need to make a sound. The threat was implicit in its very existence. Gregor, pale and sweating, stared at the wolf, then at the basket, then back at the wolf. He fumbled, his hands trembling as he began to fill her basket. Not with scraps. He piled in warm, fresh loaves, their scent a sweet agony to her empty stomach. He added cheese, a thick wedge of it, and a string of dried sausages. The wolf waited patiently. Once the basket was overflowing, it once again took the handle in its teeth and turned. It ignored the stunned, silent crowd. It walked directly back to her alley. It stopped a few feet away and gently set the laden basket down. It gave a soft huff of breath, a plume of white in the cooling air, and then looked at her. The silver eyes were no longer just ancient and powerful. There was something else in them now. A question. A quiet ache that resonated with the one in her own chest. Before she could find her voice, to thank it or run from it, the wolf turned and melted back into the evening shadows, vanishing as silently as it had appeared. Ember stared at the basket. It was a miracle. It was a death sentence. Food to last a week. And a gesture from a king who would kill her if he knew who she was. The tears she had shed for her hunger were gone, replaced by a new, more terrifying kind. She didn't sleep. The food sat on her small, rickety table, a monument to the day's madness. She gave most of it to Hemlock, who had wept with gratitude, but she couldn't bring herself to eat. Every time she looked at the bread, she saw those silver eyes. For 2 days she lived in a fog of fear, jumping at every shadow. She didn't return to the market. She stayed in her tiny one-room hovel in the city's poorest quarter, waiting for the axe to fall. On the 3rd day, a storm broke. It was a vicious late autumn squall that lashed the city with freezing rain and a wind that shrieked like a banshee. It was on that day that her life truly ended and began again. She had ventured out for firewood, huddled in a threadbare cloak. The path she took led past the edge of the King's Wood, a dark, forbidden stretch of ancient trees that bordered the city walls. It was a foolish shortcut, but the cold had seeped into her bones, and she was desperate. That was when she saw it. A splash of black against the gray scree of a small ravine just inside the tree line. At first she thought it was a shadow, a trick of the failing light. But a flicker of movement, a weak shudder caught her eye. Curiosity warred with a primal instinct to flee. This was the king's domain. Trespassers were not treated kindly. But something pulled her forward, a strange compulsion she couldn't name. She scrambled down the slick, muddy bank, her worn boots slipping. As she got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was the wolf, the king's wolf. It was lying on its side, its magnificent black fur matted with mud and rain. Its breaths were shallow, ragged things. But it wasn't a wolf anymore. As she watched, the form wavered, shimmered, and contracted. Bones cracked and reshaped with a sickening sound that was barely audible over the wind. Where the great beast had been, a man now lay. He was naked, his skin unnaturally pale, almost blue in the frigid air. A tracery of frost seemed to cling to his skin, a delicate, deadly pattern that spread from his chest. He was broad-shouldered, built with the savage grace of a predator, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. And his face. It was a face made for cruelty and command, all harsh lines and unforgiving angles. It was the face from the coins, the statues. King Carden. He was unconscious, or dying. Her first thought was to run, to flee and forget she had ever seen this. He was the enemy of her blood, the man whose ancestors had slaughtered hers. Leaving him here would be a small, secret vengeance. She took a step back. Her mother's voice was in her ear again. Weak. You can't even hate properly. But then he shivered, a violent, bone-jarring tremor that shook his entire frame. A low moan escaped his lips, a sound of pure agony. and his eyes flickered open. They were silver, just like the wolf's, but clouded now, unfocused. They stared through her, seeing nothing. Cold, he whispered, the word a frozen puff of air. And in that moment, he wasn't the Frostwolf King. He wasn't the butcher of her people. He was just a man, freezing to death in the rain. And she, who had known cold her entire life, could not turn her back on it. The decision was not a thought. It was an instinct. It was madness. Get up, she grunted, grabbing his arm. It was like touching a block of ice. The cold of him was shocking, unnatural. It bit at her fingers, a deep, gnawing chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. She was small, underfed, but desperation gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She wrapped his arm over her shoulders, taking his weight, and hauled him to his feet. He swayed, leaning on her, his head lolling against her shoulder. The frost on his skin seemed to burn her through her thin cloak. "Come on," she gasped, her legs shaking under the strain. "It's not far." She half dragged, half carried him out of the woods, stumbling through the mud and rain. Every step was a battle. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed. But she didn't stop. She was driven by that same strange compulsion, the echo of those silver eyes in the market alley. He had helped her. Now she would help him. Her hovel was a sanctuary of squalor. She managed to get him through the door and collapsed with him onto the thin straw mattress that served as her bed. He was shivering uncontrollably now, his teeth chattering a frantic, desperate rhythm. The frost was spreading, a beautiful, lethal filigree across his chest and arms. This was no ordinary cold. This was magic, a curse, power eating its host alive. She stripped off her wet cloak and his ruined clothes, what little was left of them, and piled every blanket she owned on top of him. It wasn't enough. The cold radiating from him was a palpable entity, sucking the warmth from the tiny room. Panic seized her. What had she done? She had brought the dying king into her home. When he was found, they would execute her not just for being Blackwood, but for being the one at his side when he died. She looked at his face, slack with pain. The harsh lines were softened, the cruel mouth vulnerable. He was beautiful, in the way a glacier was beautiful, vast and merciless and breaking apart from within. She had to do something. She stoked the tiny fire in her hearth until it blazed, using the last of her precious wood. It did nothing. The room grew colder. She boiled water and tried to force some between his lips, but he couldn't swallow. There was only one thing left. One last, desperate measure. With trembling hands, she shed her own damp dress. Clad only in her thin linen shift, she slid under the blankets beside him. The shock of his skin was breathtaking. It was a physical blow, a cold so profound it felt like a burn. It stole the air from her lungs and sent a tremor of agony through her. But she didn't pull away. She wrapped her arms around his torso, pressing her small, warm body against his frozen one. She buried her face in the hollow of his neck and held on, offering the only thing she had left to give: her own heat. It was like trying to warm a mountain with a single candle. His cold was a living thing, a predator. It clawed at her, drawing the life from her, and she could feel her own body temperature beginning to drop. Her limbs grew numb. Her thoughts became sluggish. This was it. This was how she would die, in a miserable hovel, trying to save the man she should hate most in the world. A bitter, ironic smile touched her lips. At least it was a choice, her own choice. She was drifting, sinking into a gray twilight when his hand moved. It was a slow, clumsy motion, but it was deliberate. His fingers, stiff with cold, closed over her arm. A spark of his energy, faint but fierce, shot through her. "Stay," he murmured, his voice a raw whisper against her hair. And she did. The days that followed blurred into a strange, secret rhythm of caretaking and fear. Carden drifted in and out of consciousness. During the lucid moments he was quiet, his silver eyes watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He never asked how he got here. He never asked who she was. He simply accepted her presence as if it were his right. She fed him broth, spooning it carefully past his pale lips. She kept the fire roaring, burning through wood she stole from the royal park under the cover of darkness. She held him through the nights when the cold threatened to consume him entirely, lending her warmth until she was shaking and numb herself. During one of those long nights, he spoke. His voice was stronger, the fog of his delirium lifting. The cold. It is my own power, a gift from the first Alpha. It preserves, but it also consumes. She was pressed against his side, her head resting on his chest. She could feel the faint, steady beat of his heart beneath the layer of unnatural chill. "Why?" she whispered. "It demands a balance," he said, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. "A warmth to anchor it. For centuries my line has managed. But I am the last. The power grows, and the anchor weakens." He turned his head, his silver eyes finding hers in the dim light. "I have been searching for the other half of the bond, the fire to my frost." Her breath caught. The bond. The fabled mate bond that was supposed to complete an alpha. She was Blackwood. She couldn't be. It was impossible. "I saw you in the market," he continued, his voice low and resonant. A flicker of warmth in a world of gray. I felt it. A tiny, buried ember. Ember. He had called her an ember. He didn't know her name. He couldn't. "I was coming for you," he said. "But the cold. It chose that moment to surge. I lost control." So the wolf hadn't been an accident. He had been looking for her. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The most powerful man in the world had seen her, a nobody, and felt something. "Why me?" The question was a bare whisper. His hand, still cool but no longer painfully so, came up to cup her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, a gentle, reverent touch that sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "I don't know," he admitted. "The bond chooses. It is a mystery, older than the packs." Outside, the city hummed with tension. She heard the guards marching in the streets, their calls echoing in the night. They were searching for their king. Every footstep, every shout, was a dagger of fear in her heart. They were living on borrowed time, hidden in plain sight. Their tiny room was a world unto itself, a fragile bubble of warmth and secrets. He was getting stronger. The frost on his skin had receded, now just a faint shimmer on his chest in the mornings, gone by midday. He could sit up on his own, and the color was returning to his face. The harsh lines were still there. But now she saw the weariness beneath them, the centuries of solitude etched into his features. He never demanded. He never commanded. With her, the terrifying Alpha King was quiet, watchful, and almost gentle. He would watch her as she moved about the room, his gaze a physical touch. One morning he caught her hand as she brought him a bowl of watered-down oatmeal. "This is not fit for you," he said, his voice rough. "It is all I have," she replied, her gaze dropping to the floor. The shame of her poverty was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth. "When we are back in the castle," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "you will eat from my plate. You will want for nothing." It wasn't a promise. It was a statement of fact, and it made her heart ache with a hope so fierce it was painful. She pulled her hand away, suddenly afraid. "I can't go to the castle." "You will," he said simply. The bubble burst a week after she found him. The knock on the door was not the hesitant rap of a neighbor. It was a hard, authoritative sound that vibrated through the floor. Carden, who was sitting at her table, dressed in a rough spun tunic she had bought with the last of her coin, froze. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the king return, the gentleness replaced by a cold, sharp alertness. "Hide!" he commanded in a low growl, but there was nowhere to go. The door swung open, splintering the flimsy lock. Two men in the black and silver livery of the king's royal guard filled the doorway. Behind them, a woman stood, cloaked in dark, rich velvet. The woman stepped into the room, her gaze sweeping over the squalor with disdain. She was beautiful, her face a mask of elegant cruelty, her dark hair coiled in an intricate braid. Her eyes, the color of chips of obsidian, landed on Ember. A slow, triumphant smile curved her lips. "Well, well," the woman said, her voice like honey laced with poison. "Look what the gutter coughed up." Ember felt the blood drain from her face. It was her mother, Lady Anya of the fallen Blackwood pack. "Mother," she breathed, the word tasting like ash. Carden rose slowly to his feet, his body positioned protectively in front of Ember. He was still weaker than his peak, but he radiated an aura of lethal power that made the guards take an involuntary step back. "Lady Anya," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "you are a long way from your lands." Anya's smile widened. She ignored him, her entire focus on Ember. "I heard a rumor," she said, circling the small room like a predator, "that a girl of my bloodline was seen in the capital, a girl who was supposed to have died in the purges. Imagine my surprise." Her gaze flicked to Carden. "And imagine my delight to find her hiding the lost king. My daughter. You always did have a talent for finding trouble." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her mother hadn't come for her. She had come for him. She had used Ember as bait. "What do you want, Anya?" Carden's voice was like grinding ice. "Want?" She laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "I want what is owed to my people. I want restitution. And I think," she paused, her eyes glinting, "that the king's life is a fair price." She gestured to Ember. "Especially when he has been consorting with the daughter of his greatest enemy." The threat was clear. She would expose him. She would tell the world he had been weakened, laid low, and sheltered by a Blackwood. It would shatter his reputation. His enemies within the other packs would smell blood in the water. It would mean civil war. "She has nothing to do with this," Carden said, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Oh, but she has everything to do with it," Anya purred. "She is the key, the perfect leverage." She turned her cold eyes on Ember again. "You have a choice, Your Majesty. Surrender yourself to my hospitality, or I will scream this girl's name from the rooftops. I will tell them all that a Blackwood witch has ensorcelled you. Your council will have no choice but to demand her head, and you will be too weak to stop them." It was a perfect trap. His kingdom, or her life. Ember looked at Carden. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the terrible weight of his crown warring with the protective instinct that had bound them together in this tiny room. He would choose the kingdom. He had to. He was a king before he was a man, and she couldn't let him be broken because of her. She couldn't be the cause of his ruin after she had just saved him. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from behind him. Her legs were trembling, but she forced her voice to be steady. "I'll go with you," she said to her mother. "Ember, no." Carden's voice was a raw command. She looked at him, her heart splintering. She tried to pour every ounce of her feeling, of the strange, fragile love that had grown in the firelight, into that one look. "Please understand. It's all right," she said softly. "She's my mother. I will be safe." It was a lie, and they all knew it. Anya's smile was predatory. "A wise decision, daughter." She gestured to her guards. "Take her. One of the guards moved towards her. Carden let out a guttural growl, a sound so primal and full of rage that the man froze in his tracks. For a second, Ember thought he would fight, that he would tear them all apart and damn the consequences. But he didn't. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a torment that mirrored her own. He was trapped. He was a king, and a king's duty was to his people. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. Permission. Surrender. The guard grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. Ember didn't resist. She let them lead her out of the hovel, out of the life she had briefly, impossibly shared with him. As they pulled her into the street, she looked back one last time. Carden stood in the doorway, a solitary figure of ice and fury. His face was a mask of controlled agony. He had saved his kingdom, but in doing so, he had sacrificed her. The world went gray once more. The journey was a blur of cold misery. Her mother didn't speak to her, treating her as less than baggage. They didn't return to the ruined Blackwood lands, but to a fortified manor on the edge of the city, a place Ember had never seen. It was grim and cold, a stone prison. They threw her into a windowless room in the cellar. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and despair. The only light came from a thin slot in the heavy wooden door. There was a pile of straw in one corner and a bucket in the other. It was a cage. Days bled into one another. Twice a day, a grim-faced guard would shove a piece of stale bread and a cup of water through the slot. The silence was a living thing, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the darkness and the frantic beating of her own heart. She thought of Carden, the memory of his touch, of his quiet voice, of the vulnerability in his silver eyes, was all that kept her from shattering. She clung to it, a single point of warmth in an ocean of cold. Had he forgotten her? Was he safe? Had he made the right choice? The questions were a form of torture. One day, the door creaked open. Her mother stood there holding a lantern. The light cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. "I hope you've had time to reflect on your uselessness," Anya said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Ember pushed herself up, her back against the cold wall. "What do you want from me?" "From you? Nothing," her mother scoffed. "You were never the prize. You were the bait. And now that the king has taken it, you are simply a loose end." She stepped closer, the lantern light illuminating the cold fury in her eyes. "He is consolidating his power, calling his banners. He thinks he can come for you. He thinks he can defy me." A spark of hope ignited in Ember's chest. He was coming. He hadn't abandoned her. Anya saw the flicker of emotion on her face and smiled cruelly. "Oh, don't look so pleased. He won't find you. Not the you he remembers." She set the lantern down and produced a small, wicked-looking silver knife. "The magic in our bloodline comes with a price. It can be sealed. Permanently. A ritual my grandmother taught me. You should have been a powerful one, Ember. You had a spark. But you were always too soft. Too full of feeling." She knelt in front of Ember, the knife glinting. "I sealed it once, when you were a child. A temporary measure, to keep you weak, to keep you controllable. But your little king has managed to stir it. I can feel it. A faint warmth, like a banked fire. We can't have that." The memory hit her like a physical blow, a fever when she was 6 years old. Her mother's hands on her, cold and unforgiving, a sharp pain and then a hollowing out. The world had seemed a little grayer after that day. She had thought it was just the sickness. "Why?" Ember whispered, the question torn from the deepest part of her. "Why have you always hated me?" Anya's face twisted. "Hate you? I don't hate you. I don't think about you at all. You were a means to an end. Your father, he loved you. He thought your gentle heart was a gift. It was a weakness. It's what got him killed when Carden's father came for us. Strength is the only thing that matters, daughter. Power. Something you will never understand. Rage, hot and pure, surged through Ember. It was a lifetime of pain, of being told she was nothing, of carrying the weight of her mother's disappointment. It was a fire in her veins, burning away the fear. "You're wrong," she said, her voice shaking with the force of her emotion. "Strength isn't cruelty. Strength is choosing to help someone when you have nothing. It's sharing your warmth when the world is cold." She was thinking of Carden, of the way he had looked at her. He hadn't seen a Blackwood. He hadn't seen an enemy. He had seen her, and in his eyes she hadn't been worthless. The rage was a storm inside her. It wanted to lash out, to hurt her mother as she had been hurt. But as she looked at Anya's bitter, empty face, she saw not a monster, but a broken woman, consumed by her own hatred. A woman who had let her pain turn her into this. And in that moment, something shifted. The rage didn't vanish. It transformed. It settled, cooled, and clarified into a profound, aching pity. Pity for her mother, who would never know the warmth she had felt in Carden's arms. Pity for a woman so lost in her own darkness she couldn't see the light. And with that pity came a release. A letting go. She let go of the need for her mother's approval. She let go of the anger that had defined her for so long. She forgave her, not for Anya's sake, but for her own. She would not let her mother's hatred be the thing that defined her. She would not let it be her cage. "I'm not you," Ember said, her voice suddenly calm and clear. "I will never be you." As she spoke the words, a warmth bloomed in her chest. It was not the frantic heat of anger, but a deep, steady, golden light. It started in her core and spread through her veins, pushing back the cellar's chill. It was the ember Carden had seen, fanned into a flame. Anya recoiled, her eyes wide with shock, as a soft golden light began to emanate from Ember's skin. "What is this?" "The seal it should have held." The light intensified, pouring out of Ember in gentle waves. It wasn't a weapon. It was life. It was soul energy. The straw on the floor near her feet stirred, and a single pale green shoot pushed its way up from the damp earth. "No!" Anya shrieked, scrambling back. She raised the silver knife, but the light seemed to press against her, holding her at bay. It didn't burn her. It simply refused her. The door to the cellar burst open, splintering off its hinges. Carden stood there, flanked by his guards. He was dressed for war, in black leather and steel, but his eyes were only for her. He stopped dead, his gaze fixed on the golden light that surrounded her. The raw power rolling off him was immense, the cold finally under his complete control, a weapon honed to a razor's edge. His face was a storm of emotions, shock, awe, and a fierce, possessive pride. "Ember," he breathed. The light softened, sinking back into her skin, though a faint golden aura remained. The single green shoot by her foot now had a tiny white flower on it. She looked at Carden, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small or worthless. She felt whole. He had come for her, but she had already saved herself. Carden's guard seized Anya, who was staring at Ember in stunned, horrified disbelief. They dragged her away, her curses echoing, and then fading into silence. Carden walked slowly towards Ember. He didn't rush. He stopped in front of her, his silver eyes searching her face. He reached out, not with a king's command, but with a lover's hesitation, and gently touched her cheek. His skin was cool, but it was the clean, crisp coolness of a winter morning, not the deathly chill of the curse. "I am sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had to let them take you. It was the only way to draw her out, to end this without a war. It was the hardest thing I have ever done." "I know," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "I felt it." he said, his gaze dropping to her chest, where the light had been brightest. The moment your power broke free, it was like the sun rising inside me. He looked back into her eyes. You are the fire to my frost ember. You are the anchor. You are my mate. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of relief, of a joy so profound it was a physical ache in her chest. He drew her into his arms, holding her not like a fragile thing, but like an equal, like his other half. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in his scent of pine and winter and cold, clean air. He was the Alpha King, and she was the daughter of his enemy. But here, in his arms, they were just Carden and Ember. I was wrong, he murmured into her hair, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. When I said the bond chooses, I think we choose. And I choose you. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. The king was gone. The warrior was gone. There was only the man, his silver eyes full of a love so fierce and tender it stole her breath. Does it hurt? She asked softly, touching the place on his chest where the frost had once been thickest. A slow smile touched his lips, transforming his harsh face into something devastatingly beautiful. Not anymore, he said. And then he lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion or desperation. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was the quiet click of the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. It was warmth and cold, light and shadow, meeting and making something new and whole. In the darkness of the cellar, surrounded by the scent of damp earth and the single, impossible flower that grew at her feet, Ember finally understood. She wasn't scrap. She wasn't a disappointment. She was a queen. 3 months later, the Gothic spires of the royal castle were no longer just grim sentinels against a gray sky. Sunlight, real and warm, streamed through the tall arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The halls, once silent and cold, now echoed with the occasional sound of laughter. Her laughter. Ember stood on a balcony overlooking the central courtyard. A fine cloak of deep green velvet lined with wolf fur was draped over her shoulders. The chill in the air was just the bite of approaching winter, no longer a threat that lived inside the man she loved. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a familiar, clean scent of pine and frost filled her senses. Carden rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence a solid, comforting weight against her back. The council is still grumbling, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. They don't know what to make of a queen from a rival bloodline who can make flowers grow in stone. She smiled, leaning her head back against his. Let them grumble. They'll get used to it. Her mother was imprisoned in the highest tower of the castle. She refused all visitors, consumed by her own bitter silence. Ember had not seen her since that day in the cellar, and she felt no need to. Her past was a story she had read, not a place she had to live. The Blackwood Pack, what was left of it, had sworn a new oath of fealty, not out of fear, but out of a dawning respect for the woman who had ended a centuries-long feud without spilling a drop of blood. They are afraid of your power, Carden continued, his voice soft. They think you will unmake the old ways. My power is not for unmaking things, she said, placing her hand over his. It's for healing them. Her light had not cured his cold, not entirely. It was a part of him, of his bloodline, but it no longer consumed him. Her warmth acted as an anchor, a balance. They were two sides of a coin, and together they were whole. He turned her in his arms, his silver eyes serious. The love in them was a constant, steady flame that warmed her to her very soul. He still looked at her, as if she were a miracle. I love you, he said. The words were not spoken under duress or in a moment of crisis. They were spoken in the quiet peace of a new morning, a simple, profound truth that formed the foundation of their new world. "I know," she whispered, a happy tear tracing a path down her cheek. She reached up and wiped it away before it could fall. "And I love you, my king." He smiled, that rare, breathtaking smile that was hers alone. "I am your king," he agreed. "But you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl that sent a delicious shiver down her spine, "are my everything." He kissed her then, a long, slow kiss full of the promise of shared dawns and quiet nights, of a future built not on power or bloodlines, but on the simple, unshakable strength of a man and a woman who had found each other in the dark and chosen to walk into the light together. The world outside could grumble and fear all it wanted. Here, in his arms, she was home.